this week in the Book Warehouse, I am here live with Charlie Demers.
That's correct. Beautiful pronunciation.
Demers, if you will.
Yeah.
So you are, amongst a myriad of things, you are a comedian, you are a broadcaster, you are an author of multiple genres,
Yeah.
including the book. We had brought you in to talk about the A-Team, but you've also, just before we hit record, you said you've got a brand new book coming out as well.
So this one will be a very new endeavor for me. This is a children's picture book. So it's a picture book really for littles, and kind of imagine sort of like written content in the kind of maybe almost even in a board book kind of world, but it's with these sort of beautiful pictures, illustrations by Dorothy Leung from Toronto, who's just done an incredible job. The book is coming out from Tradewind Books, and it's called I Sure Do. I sort of wrote it, the bulk of it I was on vacation in Dublin with my family, and anybody who loves literature should go to Dublin. It's a UNESCO World Literature City. It's also, like Canada, it's a place that has a complicated relationship with the English language, but then it has these people that, had the English language kind of foisted on them, and then just mastered it and became these just kind of incredible producers of the English language. And everywhere you go in Dublin, the writers are being celebrated, like, it's just every kind of in theater and in poetry and in fiction and I just kind of, I don't know, I really feel like it seeped in. I was on vacation. I was not trying to write. I was not trying to do any work, but I was talking with my daughter while I was pushing my son's stroller. We have very spaced out kids, not spaced out, age spaced, and this sort of playful kind of talk with my daughter sort of turned into a little sort of, and I just sat down and wrote out this little poem on my phone, and that comes out beautifully illustrated by this incredible artist in a couple of weeks, and I'm so really excited about it.
So exciting. I love it. I have to backtrack. You really thrown me a curveball here, because that sounds like a fantastic thing to talk about.
This is the opposite of
opposite
of gotcha journalism.
Right.
Like when the subject comes in and goes, I had an affair.
Yeah. How did you scooped me?
Yeah.
But where I like to start interviews is if listeners are maybe not familiar with who you are, I realize I gave you a very brief chyron, but I always like to ask my guest, who the hell are you?
Yeah, I think, like, if people do know me, where they tend to know me from is from a show on CBC Radio called The Debaters. This is our 20th year now of doing that show, and so we're celebrating our 20th anniversary, and that's a show that I've been doing from the beginning, and I actually think that's a great place to know me from if you're gonna know me, because I feel like that show is kind of hits all my kind of, because it's a comedy show, but it's also a show about writing. Like, there's a lot of writing that goes into that show, and there's a lot of, so I would say, like, when I'm answering the question of who I am, particularly in a kind of forward-facing, way that's relevant to kind of say more relevant to the book buying public than my children or my partner.
Or the esoteric introspection.
That kind of esoteric introspection. I don't think I could begin to answer, and so I think that's the sort of Socratic ignorance the first true sign of wisdom. I would say, like, when I was in high school, I took one of those proficiency, and it actually gave me as an option humorist. I would say, like, that's, and a lot of comedians, and I'm a stand-up comedian as well, and a lot of comedians kind of say, like, oh yeah, humorists are comedians who don't have to be funny all the time. Like, it's kind of looked down on as but I do think humorist gets pretty close to the nub of, and I feel like as I'm getting older, I'm purifying a little bit in terms of, like, when I was young, it was very important for me to not just be somebody who could be reducible to, oh, what he does is just funny, or it's like it's more complicated than that, or it's more interesting than that. And as I get older, I feel grateful to have something like being funny to have and to be and feel like
simplify for me.
Simplify, And I'm more interested actually at this stage of my life in kind of specializing
Sure.
and enjoying when other people do the things that I actually can't really do.
So the thing that's bringing us together today initially was the A-Team, was a book you've written about kind of Canadian language and lexicon and these kinds of things. And you know, as I was reading it, I have to say very rare for me to laugh out loud when I'm alone. And I think often I find in a lot of different comedy settings, if I'm just by myself, it's a very like, but I found myself laughing out loud reading and like hearty big to the point where then I was reading it in a coffee shop earlier today. I was reading a few entries and embarrassing myself. I was laughing so hard at some of the stuff. You know?
Well, this makes me very like, I mean, I can't tell you how much that means. And it's like that's where I think some of that kind of condescension that I was alluding to earlier comes from, about, you know, a humorist is a comedian that doesn't have to be funny all the time. You know, if you're doing stand-up, you're performing, and this is less and less true, by the way, in the era of stand-up being something that people are mostly enjoying on Instagram.
Of course, the crowd work and the clips of that, and
But I mean, now you can watch stand-up and go, huh, and then gone, and then that's a successful engagement. If in sort of classic stand-up comedy, you need to make the whole audience, they have to laugh. They can't just smile. They have to laugh. And they all have to laugh at about the same time. Like they can't all be getting it at different times. And that's one of the things that's quite liberating about humor, text-based humor writing, is like you're now released from that of like the reader can have whatever response is physiologically organic, but also they can take it at the pace that they are, because it's a totally one-on-one.
It's their own personal timing. And I did find that, you know, God, we're already, I haven't even gotten to my first question, but it's no, it's great. It's great. But it's, you know, what I found about reading it was that you could pick up your pace. You could figure out what your kind of cadence was. But if you're not reading at that pace, it doesn't matter. You're still you're still following it. And you still have your own personal flow, but you can see what you're going for as well. And it's this beautiful candor, and your asides absolutely slay me. Just like there's something about it was the French immersion entry about, was it the Protestant schools? And there was something about only in practice they don't actually nail their hallmark to the doors. You know?
Right. Pretty good, right? Thank you very much. That's a pretty good joke,
right?
So I'm pretty happy to have that highlighted in internet public.
As somebody who was in, you know, I went to French immersion as well, right? You know what I mean? And so it's just, and also the relief of knowing that French fries and English muffins is like a universal thing. I was telling my partner about that. About like, there was like at lunchtime, there was wars of catch. And it was the English muffins versus the French fries. And she couldn't understand where these terms even came from.
No, and my dad, who is in education, French fries and English muffins became a term of art in the education world. It was like, really? You'd be like, well, you know, there's the French fries and the English muffins. Like that's how you would describe the two streams of kids. And I mean, I was just talking about this with my brother, because ironically, so our catchment school, like the school we would have gone to if we'd just been in kind of regular old school, was quite a rough school.
Sure.
But then we went instead to school with a lot of like quite middle class kids in the French immersion stream of what was then also a very rough school. And so the kids in the English muffins at my elementary school, like it was a very different thing to be a French fry or an English muffin.
I was scared
at that school.
I was scared of the English kids. At my
for
school.
Sure.
It scared the crap out of me. But I never knew. This is we're so off track here. But I just like, I know it's not. This is the beauty of the podcast. But I never knew the sort of socioeconomic impacts of immersions until very recently, and I was learning about that. And I was like, oh my God, this is like a whole other can of worms that I don't even know what to do about, you know?
It's weird because it's this bizarre inversion of the class and social dynamics of French and English in all the rest of Canadian history, where suddenly the French thing is like the fancy thing. And of course, like the French immersion is not actually for French people.
Right.
And in fact, it's like, so my daughter she's in the Francophone school system, which is a whole other thing.
Permutations.
Worlds, the permutations. Yeah, exactly. And I was always very defensive of French immersion. You know, my dad was a special needs teacher who started the first bilingual resource room in British Columbia. There was like and I still I do defend French immersion. I think it's just something that should be made available to everyone who wants.
I know for me, like, it's like, I haven't been able to lose it. You know,
No,
like
which is great.
I haven't been in a French room essentially since grade 9.
Yeah.
And yet I can't lose it. No matter how hard I try, no matter how hard the drinking tries, you know?
Well, my unilingually French speaking family in the the suburbs outside of Montreal. I mean, I've been with my wife now for 20 years, 21 years. And this is almost kind of insulting, I guess, but like when she speaks to them, they'll kind of mid-sentence still be kind of looking at me like, just, why does she speak French? Like, why does this Chinese Canadian woman from Toronto who you married, how can she speak French this well? Like, and it's because her parent, particularly her mom. I mean, this is also like a very special thing. Like, I always just think of like, the whole kind of American stereotype of like going on vacation and then being angry that they don't speak American where you land, versus like my mother-in-law who like arrived in her new country and thought, I'm going to make sure my kids learn the language of like the minority group lost a war 150 years ago, and then as it turns out, her kid marries into a family where like she's speaking the language with, she's got Francophone grandchildren. And it's like, it's a beautiful thing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So that really leads me to my first question.
Okay, awesome.
I love this. The book itself is it's a celebration of lexicon and language.
Yeah.
But it also really felt like it's also about recognition. It's about, feeling, almost like the feeling of hearing a word and knowing that, when these words are spoken, you're amongst your people. And I'm curious, what was the emotional engine behind writing this book, especially kind of as we talk, we've already alluded to, sort of beyond just comedy or humor, what's the sort of emotional engine behind that?
Yeah, I love that question. Great first question.
Oh, thank you.
I'm glad we warmed up before we got to it. Because I feel like a book like this, it could have been really corny, or it could have been like, there are ways I think of writing a book like this.
A lot of winking mountains.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly the book I'm talking about. Sold in a kind of, tourist trap shops in Gastown or something like that. And here's the thing, when you write something like this, it's like, this is the first time I've ever written a book that's been for sale in like the pharmacies and it's fun to see your book in a pharmacy. Like, I will say, cool, after like, I started publishing books in 2009. This started as a commission. Like, it was Jen Kroll, who's, really one of the brighter publishing minds in our city. I mean, I think in Canadian letters, she's got a brilliant track record of procuring and nurturing books that are like creative and unique, but also like find an audience. Like, and she thought, look, we're obviously in the middle of this kind of moment of sort of reassessment and what does it mean to be Canadian, and this sort of moment of sort of put upon patriotism, and do you think it'd be fun to write this lexicon project? And just because somebody asks you to do something doesn't mean you have to do it. And you can also just be flattered and say no thanks. And in fact, I can say, this went pretty well.
Mhm.
And Jen and I, we said like we want to do another lexicon. And she said, well, what about this? And I just thought, you know what, I don't think that's the one. Like so I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think there was something to really kind of lean into. And
I think that's the beauty of the book, is that it's not just a surface reading. It's you really dig into stuff.
Well, I'm really glad that comes through. I mean, what I wanted to do in this moment was like, one, I thought I could write something funny. Like I talked this through with, my wife is the person who I have a lot of these, first level conversations with,
Sure.
and she's been a creative consultant and collaborator from the very beginning. I thought this could really work. Like this book could be like, it could be funny, it could be thoughtful. And what I hope it is like kind of sort of thoughtfully patriotic in this moment that does need us to kind of find ourselves together in a kind of first person plural, without jettisoning the critical thinking and critical kind of awareness that really have to an extraordinary extent been sort of taken on board in sort of mainstream Canadian society over the last like 15 years. I mean, we are seeing, the body rejecting the heart transplant, where we are in the kind of the backlash,
the regression, the
regression.
Sort of yeah.
Sorry, I got lost in a little. I was like, what is it? It's like, normally it's like the body rejects the baboon heart, but like this time it's like somebody tried to put a heart in a baboon, and the baboon is just like, I don't want this. I don't want this.
But you're really going to something though about this idea of like, I always see it as, I was taught in theater history about how like all fashion is all it's ever about is at one point it goes big, and then the response is it goes small.
Right,
and then it gets big, and then it goes smaller. And that's how anything ever works. Is and we're just, unfortunately, we enjoyed a really, really nice period of expansion. It just happened to also coincide with all these other problems, so it didn't feel like a very expansive time. And we're now in a time where it's naturally going to cycle into a compression, but unfortunately, that's coupled with a bunch of other really unfortunate things to speak very esoterically.
Esoterically, and yet somehow putting one's finger right on. And so I didn't want to be part of that moment that said like, oh, we're taking on a little bit of water. So like, let's throw out these land acknowledgements. They're weighing us down. Let's throw out this stuff about, the
land back entry is one of my favorite entries in the entire book. It was beautiful. What's not to derail it, just
no.
So many of the entries are so concise, and I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about the book, is that these aren't long entries. These are, the book is small, and each entry is a couple pages max, and yet what you pack into there is incredible.
Is like, one, take assignments. Like writers should take more commissions, because it's like they knew Greystone Books. They knew what the book had to like. They're like, we know what the word count has to be. We know how long these entries can be. Like the long entries are 610 words. The shortest entries are 145 words. Wow. And the medium entries are, I think, 345 words.
Gotcha.
380 words. I think those are the numbers.
Okay.
But it's something like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, these are written like to those numbers.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And
because we were talking about the nuance that's involved in this, and you don't just pretend it's like, and everything's great, and isn't Canada beautiful, and aren't we just this happy-go-lucky G-shucks, it's like you really dig into the warts of the country,
And that is partly because I had to do it in the space provided.
Right, yeah.
I think if I'd been given unlimited space for as many entries as I wanted, the parts where I got into the dark stuff would probably have overweighed the funny, because I would have felt a need to get too much into it, do the book that no one is asking me to write. Like no one needs me to write it. Nobody's asking me to write it. Yep. But like the book that relitigates all the stuff that everybody knows I'm talking about when I'm alluding to this stuff. I had to keep it economical. And then the other thing that these like publisher imposed, word counts did was it put me right back into the world of the debaters, this show I've been doing for 20 years, where when we write our opening rants and closing arguments on the debaters, we have to write 260 to 280 words to open, 110 to 120 words to close. So I, for 2 decades, have been
poetry,
writing these. It's this intense prose poetic combination of joke dense text that nevertheless has to convey argument and some data and keeps the focus and keeps always driving towards this I realized pretty early on in the process, I was like, oh, these are debaters muscles. And then when Jen Kroll from Craystone was at the launch and she heard me read it for the first time, she went, oh, it's stand-up. It's like that was the but it's a whole different kind of, but if you get too booky, then and I don't know what I would have done with all of the complexities of my feelings if I'd been given just free rein. And it helped.
No, there's something really beautiful about that economy, and it really, it allows for you to make the point. Something I would often talk about when I was a teacher was this idea of like, make your point and move on. You don't have to keep on repeating it. Like, we get it. And this book I feel like is actually a really shining example of that, of like, you don't keep hammering it. You just say, this is, know this. Let's go on to the let's get on, right? So there is a real tenderness to a lot of Canadian humor, right? And a lot of Canadian culture, the idea of the Big Friendly Giant, right? Mr. Dress Up, the Heritage Minutes, these are things that we think of very fondly and very tenderly. Why do you think we hold those as shared reference points so tightly? And what do you think that we're actually protecting when we kind of project those, Do you think that, for instance, do you think that this is a bit of a projection to protect what you have identified at other places as kind of like a Canadian smugness that allows us to, pretend like we're doing better than we actually are, especially in reference to what these entrances of like, it's not all rosy here, right? And we don't need to, we can love the Big Friendly Giant, but also he wasn't even Canadian, or whatever it might be, you know what I mean? And so I'm curious, why do you think we collectively shared those reference points more than maybe more, I don't know if I want to call them honest, but
That's a really good question, and I don't want to give a glib answer to it. And it's funny because both the Friendly Giant and Mr. Dress Up are Americans. I know. They were both, which is such a funny thing. But it's also it's so weird that both also totally unknown in the United States. And there's
and why does that matter? They're just performers.
Anglo-Canadian culture was always the shorthand for describing it was always, it's a mix of American and British, or it's like this halfway kind of. And yet, both British and American, the comedy are both much more vicious than Canadian comedy, right? British comedy is very cold. Really,
to the point where I'm like, this isn't funny anymore.
No,
this is an excuse to be mean.
It's really kind of, but then I also I remember I watched a couple of seconds of a clip from the roast of Kevin Hart recently, and it wasn't even some of the more controversial stuff that because there was a lot of I think pretty understandable backlash to that.
Unnecessary.
But I saw it, just I forget whose bit, and I just thought I just was so put off by it. And it was but put off by it the way I would be if my daughter brought me like, some like special kind of ultra sour candy that's like for kids, and you go like, oh, that's not for me. Like that it's made for someone else's taste. This is not for me. Like I was watching that roast video and thinking like, oh, this is I'm not built for this. And I remember specifically thinking, this is so American.
Yeah.
And so you go, okay, so what is it? And my worry is to say that it comes from a sentimentality. Sentiment is usually a cover and a camouflage for, and this is always the thing we worry about with Canadian culture, right? That the manners are really a form of, camouflaging passive aggression, that the sort of self-effacing is really a kind of way of again camouflaging passive aggression. Like that it's all just basically there's some kind of and the sentimentality.
It's all rooted in that. It's all rooted in that British niceism. What's that show? What's the show? The rich people and the servants put too much salt in the dish, and there was a big kerfuffle. The British
Downton Abbey.
Downton Abbey. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, exactly. But it's like so much of Canadian culture, especially Anglo culture, is rooted in that type of. That's the history of it. Right? Is the politeness and the aloofness, right?
And in my experience, like for instance, Indigenous humor in Canada, it's unsentimental, but it's not mean, and humor in Quebec is very it can be mean, but it's not particularly kind of cruel, or it doesn't have that kind of like,
it's just bullyism. I just don't know where this bully comes. Well, I mean, I do know where it came from. I just have no time for it.
There's a gentleness. There's a gentleness in Canadian comedy. Like that's what we're talking about right now.
Yeah,
right?
And just kind of culture in general. Like, especially the culture touch points.
Right.
Like thinking of the ones that really echo. I always think of, there's a generation of people who all you have to say is house hippo. And it's like they're,
what's that from again?
It's one of those like kids awareness. It was a commercial. It was it was literally for media literacy, right? Because they were like the house hippo lives, and then it was like that looked really real, I know the cadence of that sentence, but it's like there's a generation that you say those words and it's like the heart explodes, right? And I don't know. I think it's a multifaceted question. I think it's a very multifaceted answer, but it's like I'm curious about your, like why do you think those are the moments that echo and resonate and hold us together? Whereas like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a counterexample, but there's none coming because I don't.
I mean,
there
is. I think there is just baked into the country. There is just not that same. I might live to regret this. Maybe I'm venturing a grand theory that I don't quite fully buy. So like, take this as tentative. I'm putting this out tentatively. Like there is a like. So if there's a theologian at the Vancouver School of Theology, an Indigenous theologian named Ray Aldred, who talks about treaty as basically being the possible of a like, if there is a viable, coherent identity and narrative and sort of shared kind of like, if there really is a kind of atom at the center of like what it could mean to coherently be a Canadian or to live in this country, of like for non-Indigenous people in particular, treaty is at the heart of it.
It has to be.
Yeah. And that thought, I'm really quite influenced by the thinking of Paul Tillich, and Tillich had a whole thing about how, nations have kind of like vocations. There are these things that various national cultures just kind of bring to the world. They have like, and obviously that's idealized and all that kind of, but and of course he didn't talk about what Canada's was, because Canada was too marginal to figure it into. I was reading that and I was like, well, what would it be? And like it would be treaty. Like that's the, like when things aren't working, that's the thing that's been deformed.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's been abandoned. And when things are like, when it's like it's a country based on like, you know, the the francophone population is conquered and then afforded these like specific rights of like the proclamation of 1763 says like this is going to be the, and like and then all of those agreements are like abrogated and deformed and betrayed. But that those are still the ideas at the heart of, and there is something about like versus in the States, the idea at the heart of it is this revolutionary idea of, you know, a kind of zero-sum confrontation that like,
but it's, I'm hearing this sort of like, you know, America's like a push for self, whereas like the Canadian sentiment that I'm hearing you talk about, that I'm very much in alignment with, I think, is this idea of like how to collectivize and how to, you know, and it, you know, it doesn't very rarely, if ever, sticks
to live with each other, how to be with each other, and understanding that like it's not just you. There could never be a Canadian, and like that's what a Canadian looks like or sounds like, or like that's what a Canadian thinks. It's like the Canadian is the idea of those 2 or 3 or 4, like how do they, and like again, this is completely idea, because I know that for a very long time it was like, yes, a Canadian is a white, English speaking Protestant, like they're like, and yet the idea of it, like that was always felt as a distortion.
I agree. And I think, you know, a friend of mine a couple of years ago, it described Canada as basically one of the greatest social experiments the world has ever seen.
I totally agree,
because there's never been a country that has attempted to legislate multinationality in a way that this country has. And like I say, you know, it has not done great of a job,
right?
But it's tried in a way that no country really ever has, historically ever, you know, and so there, you know, and that's not to say like, so we gotta, but it's like, no, I think that there is something granular, like in the soil of the formation of this country that is trying to germinate, and at moments gets to bloom out a little bit, but then, you know, cyclical stuff happens. We're still dependent on the economy, you know, money, which is a made-up concept, still influences how we're allowed to live and yada yada, right? You know, we live in Vancouver. It's like the most obscene, bizarro world thing, you know. But there, I think you are spot on that. Like, even unintentionally, there was something in the formation of what we're now calling Canada that we see sparks of, you know.
And I think like that's an, you know, when you look at, for instance, the response, you know, I think it's instructive to look at the response in Indigenous communities, in Francophone communities, like among like sovereigntist leaning Francophones, like what has been the response to the threats from the United States over the last like year and a half, 2 years.
It's not to say, hey, get mine.
Exactly.
It's okay, how do we together?
Exactly. For the last 10 or 15 years, I think, in this country, we came to, I think, the sort of mainstream sort of median Canadian who kind of doesn't exist, but like in the statistical sort of main, was invited into an awareness of the country that a great many groups, I think, walk around with.
Yes.
That, you know, that actually there are a lot of people in this country that would have preferred for something much different than this country to have been the case. Whether that is a confederation of autonomous, interlocking Indigenous polities and a couple of independent French-speaking republics in Acadia and along the St. Lawrence River, and by the way, we probably wouldn't call it the St. Lawrence River, like, you know, all these things. And like, and
I mean, that would be a pretty fucking cool setup.
I think that it's important.
If the friggin' plains of Abraham hadn't happened, you know? Like,
it's important for people to hear that criticism and let that knowledge that there are people whose preferred alternative would have been that, let that inform what we do with what we have. And then as soon as Donald Trump started talking about the 51st state, it was a reminder that in the course of the 19th century, the options on offer were not Confederation of Interlocking Indigenous Polities and two French-speaking republics like versus Canada. It was Canada or
the States,
the United States from Mexico to the North Pole. And so we live in that world. And so how do we, having hopefully metabolized some of the lessons that we've learned about what the people who had this country foisted on them, or what the people who have this country who have not been in the kind of the cheerleading about it, what they have taught us, what they've taught you over the last number of years, how can that be taken on board as we deal with the, like, a really serious real world where this guy is like talking about taking over countries that don't belong to him. And I know it's like, I know it's true to say, oh, well, you know, Canada's stolen anyway. So like, so what does it mean if Donald Trump steals it? It's like, I've not heard that from a lot of people who actually had their land stolen in Canada. Like, and I think
those are mostly the people the only people I've heard say anything bordering on that are also Alberta separation.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, exactly.
So it's like, oh, so this is all bad faith argument.
It just becomes cynicism.
Yeah,
it's just cynicism. And I think there's something in Canada that is like, I don't know, can invite you to a place of non-cynicism that hopefully this doesn't make people throw up when they hear it, but I like just non-cynicism that it isn't necessarily naive, like that isn't necessarily like, whereas I feel like if you're in the United States and somebody gives you, here's the War of Independence, like here's the American Revolution, there's no compromise built into that. There's nothing like, you're either like in it or you're out of it. Whereas if you live in a country that's like a bunch of deals, a bunch of treaties that were like, that we forget, but like are sacred agreements, like agreements made between like the Crown and Indigenous leaders who, like, in both those cases, those are like spiritual fonts that are like, these are supposed to be sacred agreements that they're not just transactional. They're supposed to establish relationship.
What? I really appreciate that framing, and it's, you know, it's something that I think a lot about this stuff, and yet I don't remember the last time I've heard it framed like that. And it's a reminder that it's not a, you know, I almost feel like the idea of like the concept of treaty, like you're talking about, you know, it's something that we have communally neglected. We've allowed it to become this sort of like, oh, that's a thing that government daddy takes care of. It's like, no, that's actually something that we take care of in the neighborhood. That's something that we take care of with who's on our block. How do we show up together, you know? And that's always really trying to dig at on the show, is this idea of like, what are you doing with your neighbor? You know, that's your community. Your community isn't, you know, like yes, it is conceptually, but it's like, it's more about how are you showing up? What's your response?
And the treaty is relationship.
That's right.
And
right.
I forget the name of the author, but she's written a book called Treaty Words, and it's just this tiny little, I don't know if it's on the shelf here, but it's this beautiful tiny little a very easy to read book that kind of, it's just this reminder. And this is what, Dr. Aldred as well at VST, like, it's because, even when I was growing up, even if you were sympathetic, even if you were somebody who was like very kind of critical about what the government has done, you still sort of thought of treaties as like, oh, this was how we bought the land, and it was unfair, and it was whatever. But it's like it's not how anybody bought the land. Nobody. That was not the agreement, and
it was just how it was enacted after. Which is
exactly.
a different thing.
It's how it was treated. Yeah. But I felt like I could write about the country in a way that hopefully wouldn't be like, eat your vegetables, like that could be funny, that you could bring into the bathroom with you. I
spent a lot of time there.
And language, like language has been a fault line in this country's history, like from the very beginning. But it's also been a place where we come together, and ideally when it's really working, like we don't even notice when it's bringing us together. And then you're sitting around in the States one day and you say toque or Mandarin orange or whatever, and people look at you like and Atwood's whole thing about how it's the world's longest one-way mirror,
right?
Like because we know all their words and they know none of ours. So that if you say, if they say, I was in first grade, well, I know you were six. I understand what that means. Came after kindergarten. If you say grade 1, they're like, what does that mean? Like you're speaking in some rune.
I was clocking the time, but I was like, I want to bring you on for just a mega interview, because I feel like I'm just listening to you talk for hours.
That's very kind.
I really appreciate it.
Clearly, you and I have that in common. Right. It's been a it's been a long day. Today was one of those days where I'm probably divulging way too much, but I was in a session with a therapist, and just have the big that kind of moment where things kind of like. So now I'm in that kind of like, oh man,
it was.
But then you're just like, you're just punchy afterwards. Like you're like, is this a dream? Is this a real like?
It's like giddy. You get so like when you have a good session, you're like so charged up after. It's like
it was a lot. So it was a lot. So I'm in that kind of like half dream sort of space. So I hope I haven't gone.
No, this has been magnificent. I
obnoxiously.
I'll ask one last question before we wrap up. But before we do, I just I want to say, Charlie, this has been so much fun talking to you, and this went on a completely different direction than I was expecting, and I couldn't be happier about that.
Okay, great.
This is you really you just the way you've showed up, and just not only the way you're showing up with your work, but also just the way you showed up here and just launched in. That's the kind of energy I like dream of.
Thank you very much.
I really thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Before I kind of launch into the last little bit, where would you like to point listeners to next? Where can they find you?
So I think if you want to check out I Sure Do, that's the next big thing happening, and so that's coming out from Tradewind Books. So pick it up at the bookstore. Pick it up from your local equivalent if you're watching this from Broadway. Go to the Broadway location. I wrote a little novel that came out in 2009. My book Vancouver Special came out. Vancouver Special really sort of found its audience. Vancouver Special was in some ways a little bit like this, a lot like this actually. It was a book that was kind of commissioned. I was invited in to write it. I was writing about my city. So I was writing about a place that I had all kinds of contradictory and ambivalent and complex feelings about. It was a process of writing that at the end of it, I was like, it turns out I actually love Vancouver. And I kind of had that feeling after writing this book as well. Like, I'm sort of surprised myself with how the wells of affection that I was able to access. But The Prescription Errors, which is this little novel that nobody read except Marianne. And she had one of those little like staff who had never published anything. And she totally got the book, and she just completely, it was like ever since then, she's just been such a a big, great supporter of. But that's the next big project. And then season 2 of Super Team Canada comes out on Crave this summer.
Awesome.
And I got to write 2 episodes this season, so that was very cool. So there will be 2 episodes, I think, towards the end of the season, midway towards the end of the season, where I got to write 2 episodes. So that was a real. I'm pretty sure the Super Team Canada thing is probably how I got this job. So yeah, I think Super Team Canada, and I sure do, coming this summer.
You have no social media. You don't really use social media that much.
I'm on Instagram.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
I have a website, and I'm on Instagram. I have a semi-active Substack.
Gotcha.
I was one of the first. I was an early adopter of Substack. Monetized it.
Yeah.
And then, because during the pandemic, because I wasn't working, and then I demonetized it. And then monetizing, I'm really good at demonetizing things. Like if you want to,
I'm really good at how to not make money on stuff. Yeah. I'm a pro at that stuff.
But yeah, so I do have, and occasionally I'll send something out into the world via that. But those are pretty much my Instagram, demers.com, and yeah, the Substack, Charlie Demers.
And we're completely out of time. So
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. This is
likewise.
just an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We'll stop there.